On Valentine's Day in 2020, Amie Harwick woke up at 6:30 in the morning so she can go get her morning exercise routine in. She was able to go for breakfast and then spend the day texting back and forth with friends. That night, she decided to go out with her friends. She went to a burlesque show and then ended up going to an event. Now, by 1:02, the perfect day would come to an end. Valentine's Day was over and February 15th would be there. By 1:02 a.m., she was greeted by Gareth Pursehouse, who ended up violently beating her up, choking her, and ultimately throwing her off the balcony. Now, her roommate had woke up and went to attend to Amie Harwick, and essentially they end up calling the authorities. The authorities show up. Amie Harwick ends up passing sometime after 3 a.m. But before we get into that, I'm your host, Tim Sahlberg. Leave a like down below if you like the content. I want to hear comments from you. What do you know about this case? What do you know about domestic violence overall? And how can we help victims? That is going to be very important in this video here. And leave a like. I want to get this video out to as many people as possible, especially if you find it educational. This is something that I'm very passionate about, and I've spent a lot of time when I was working with Verizon to be the representative for Hopeline, where I would go school to school and do screenings of telling Amie's story, which I'll leave that video down on the links as well. So that being said, let's jump right into it. So that wasn't the day that Amie was planning on having. Now, why is this case so popular, and why is everybody watching Amie Harwick and Gareth Pursehouse right now? Well, for starters, Amie Harwick started dating Drew Carey back in 2017, and that relationship lasted somewhere into 2018, where they called off their engagement. Now, anytime there's a celebrity involved, although Drew Carey has nothing to do with the case, that is going to bring national attention and some media. Now, Amie Harwick herself was somewhat of a celebrity as well. Amie Harwick was a very successful sex therapist in Hollywood. She had her PhD, she was also an author, and people knew who she was. So she was popular before and after dating Drew Carey. What's interesting in this case is that she was texting Drew Carey back and forth the night before she died, and they were talking and they wanted to reconnect. Now, that didn't suggest that they wanted to reconnect as a couple, but just reconnect as friends. This case was made popular because of the celebrity status and because of the profession of Amie Harwick and because of her past relationship with Drew Carey. That being said, this case plays over and over every single day in the United States and in Canada. What I mean by that, if you look at the statistics, in the United States, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been violently abused domestically. Now, their stories might not be as popular as Amie Harwick, but their stories are the same. Every single day, people are experiencing domestic violence, and especially since COVID hit, when people weren't going to work, there was a lot more domestic violence that was happening out there, and that is something we just need to bring awareness to. Now, here's another crazy stat, and this falls very well within this case. Did you know that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 17 men experienced stalking? In the case of Amie Harwick, her stalking had started back up again in 2020. It had been 8 years since she had dated Gareth Pursehouse. Now, there was claims of stalking in the past. Amie Harwick had 2 separate restraining orders against Gareth Pursehouse after she had quit dating him back in 2012. She had happened to come across Gareth where she was a guest at a porn event, and Gareth was working that event, and they ended up running into each other, and Gareth made a big scene. This is 8 years after they dated, and that's what we think really got Gareth's wheels spinning again, where the night of the 14th, 2020, on Valentine's Day, he goes to the house, and he knows what he's doing because he gets to the Ring doorbell and he tries to cover the Ring doorbell. He triggers that doorbell 4 times throughout the night, but the first 2 times he puts his hand over it. The roommate of Amie Harwick heard some rumbling and maybe something broken within their living quarters. So she thinks that Gareth probably broke in around 8 p.m., 8:30ish p.m., and spent his time within the four walls. Now, Gareth, sitting there waiting, also had brought a syringe with him that had a lethal dose of nicotine that we think he was going to use on Amie, but there's a possibility, if you listen to the court case, that Gareth might have been thinking about using this on himself, almost like a murder-suicide situation. Now, at 1:02, Amie is greeted by Gareth, where not only does he violently beat her up, he strangles her, but he goes on to say that she ended up jumping off the balcony. Now, if you listen to the defense is saying, yes, Gareth did break in. Yes, did they get into a fight? And yes, Gareth was the cause of her death. Indirectly, he shouldn't get murder one because he did not intend to kill Amie Harwick. But if you listen to all of the evidence in this case, and this is where I want to hear from you, do you think that Gareth had in mind when he was going over to that house to kill Amie Harwick? Now, I believe he did for a couple of different reasons. When we look at the stats, remember, 1 in 4 women experience violent domestic abuse. 1 in 6 women experience stalking. Now, we already know these stats. Now, 8 years had passed since they had been dating. Gareth was so triggered at that event after seeing Amie that he started to text her. And she texted back and said, hey, we can get along from afar. We don't need to continue this. She was over it. She had moved on with her life. As a matter of fact, she was so scared when that happened, she sent herself an email saying that she did not feel safe. Knowing that she had put restraining orders on him previously, knowing what he was capable of, I can only imagine what she was thinking, or if she had any inclination that Gareth Purcell was able to commit a crime like this. Again, we talk about Amie Harwick because of the celebrity status that she has, but how many people out there, man or woman, 1 out of 4 women or 1 out of 7 men, have dealt with something very similar to this? Now, not all domestic violence ends in death. However, a lot of domestic violence does continue to escalate each time something happens. In this case, he strangles Amie Harwick, which is typically a crime of passion. And anytime that an airway is impeded, that goes to show that somebody had some intent to hurt, and in a very passionate way. Why was Gareth so obsessed with Amie Harwick? Did Gareth think in his mind that going and doing this and being violent with her was going to scare her back into being with him? Now, maybe it does. A lot of times when you're looking at domestic violence, the question comes up, why don't the victims just leave? Well, in a lot of cases, the victims are very scared. They don't know what's going to happen. And typically when death is going to happen, it's going to happen when the victim decides to leave and they end up telling their abuser. Now, in this case of Amie Harwick, she had already left. 8 years prior, she left to this happening. Fast forward 8 years, on Valentine's Day, technically the day after Valentine's because it was 1:02 a.m., she is met by an ex who is so obsessed with her that couldn't get over her in 8 years. And even in the trial, they talk about how there was a fogginess and a cloudiness after Gareth saw Amie again at that event. But they also go and talk about how wound up he was after she left him in 2012. Let me tell you, the relationship only lasted about 18 months, about a year and a half. And this is how wound up Gareth Purcell was. And I use that as an example because for folks that are out there, you got to know when domestic violence starts, it can start up pretty quick. It's not like some of the movies that you see where it could take years before domestic violence starts happening. As soon as something is a red flag, you got to be there for support, right? But again, victims are going to be scared of their abusers because what did Amie Harwick do in this case? She put 2 restraining orders on Gareth. She thought this was over. But what protection did she have when she got home that night? Now, It's a sad story. When you look at the stats, these are the stories that happen over and over again. So one last stat I want to share with you is that 75% of victims know who their stalker is. 66% of female victims that have been stalked end up being stalked by a previous partner. So think about that. Now, not all of them, again, end up in death, but this story does happen over and over again. And I do want to put a plug in here because I used to do screenings of telling Amie's story at local universities when I lived in Oklahoma. I was one of the representatives for Hopeline, so I'd have to tell the story many times, and it was sad. I'd have to do it in front of the students, and then a lot of times I'd be the PR person that would have to give a synopsis on either the radio or television in Oklahoma City. I did Tulsa, I did Lawton, I did Altus, and some of the areas like that in Oklahoma. And I'll tell you, every time I saw the story, it was very sad. I will include that link down below so you can read that one. But it's a very similar story to the Amie Harwick story. Now, both stories include an Amie. Yes, both stories are drastically different, but the similarities are the domestic violence that happens, and both end up meeting their grave due to domestic violence. And this video I wanted to bring you, one, because we do want to tell Amie's story, and we did want to get Amie Harwick's story because it is a very popular story out there, but it's a great opportunity to remind people that domestic violence happens all around us, and it's something that we need to do to keep at the forefront. I will leave the domestic violence number for US. I would suggest if you have something going on, definitely use your local authorities and also use your state authorities or provincial authorities. So that being said, a very heavy video this week. Yes, it's about Amie Harwick, but it's about every other person that has ever experienced domestic violence in their relationships, and hopefully that'll bring some awareness up, at the very least some awareness on who they can call if they feel like they're ever in trouble. That being said, if you've been here this long, you know what to do. Hit that like button down below if you like my content, and then the last thing is subscribe to the channel. As we're growing, we want to grow this community together. Love the engagement. Again, I'm your host, Tim Sahlberg. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.